Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Who Does What in a Crisis? Civil Preparedness from the Citizen to the State. My name is Anne-Katrine Ebbesen. I am Senior Communications Advisor here at Nordregio. And with me, I have my colleague, Elin Sletmo, who is Senior Research Fellow at Nordregio. And we're happy to welcome you to this webinar today. And the theme is preparedness. And this is not something that we're planning for in theory anymore in the Nordics. It's something that's already being tested in very real ways, and for some, part of everyday life and work. And that's what we're going to learn more about in this webinar. But first, who is behind the webinar today? The Nordic thematic groups are part of the Nordic Council of Ministers' work on regional development and planning. The top priorities that rotate every 3 years, and these themes bring together researchers, policymakers, and practitioners to the same table, literally and figuratively, to better understand and find solutions to shared challenges across the Nordic region. But we would also like to hear which region and country you're tuning in from today. So please put in the chat where you're joining us from, region, country, or both. We would love to see who we have represented here today. And before we move to the policy overview, I would like to talk about the agenda. Yes. We're opening first now with a little bit about the project. Elin will talk about that. And then we have the Nordic policy overview with Lina Andreasen, my colleague. And then we have 3 external speakers joining us to talk about preparedness in practice, both at the municipal level, regional level, and the civil society level. And then we will finish with a audience Q&A. But let me hand over to my colleague Elin again to talk about the project behind today.
Thank you so much, Anne-Katrine, and welcome also from my side here. This webinar is part of a thematic group project called Accepting and Adapting to Change, Civil Preparedness at the Local and Regional Levels. This project is running from autumn 2025 and until 2027, December, sort of. So we are just about to start, so to say. This project aims to enhance the civil preparedness at local and regional levels, and especially focusing on responding to crisis, and also enable that public administration enhance their accessibility to services for the inhabitants in the local municipalities and regions. So this is the core focus. The project is divided in 5 different steps, and we are doing different activities within these different steps. This webinar is then presenting a policy overview that we have been doing on the Nordic level. And this policy overview is then part of the first step. Also in this first step, we have developed a serious game where we are trying to interlink sustainability thinking regarding preventing crisis and resilience thinking, where you are adapting to crisis, but also learning how to respond in crisis and learn after a crisis. So these type of different knowledge streams from academic research is then integrated in the serious game in a more interactive and maybe even fun way to learn about resilience. So this is part of the project as well. The team at Nordregio is also within this framing of this project at the moment working with statistical analysis, with the local economic resilience, and this is something we are developing as we are speaking. And then we're trying to identify what type of crisis that are specifically due to the Nordic climate and where we are at the globe, so to say. So the cold climate, how that influences crisis, both the type of crisis that happens and how we respond to the crisis. And then we also have another type of dimension to our part of the globe, and that is the seasonal isolation that happens in part of the Nordic regions. There's also something that influences our crisis governance. So to learn more about that also in practice, we are also starting up this type of field studies where we go to different regions around in the Nordics, both physically going there and also talking to people in those regions to learn more. And with this webinar, I see this as a first step to that type of field study, so to say. And I hope that we today together will get some new insights on the Nordic governance on civil preparedness and crisis response.
Thank you very much, Elin, for that introduction. A few house rules. Thank you very much for all of you responding. It's great to see so many from far and wide. There's been a lot of registrations to this webinar today. So it also shows us that this is an important theme. And yeah, that's why we're also have external speakers here to learn from today. And that's why we also want to hear from you in the chat. A lot of you are experts in this field as well. So please write your questions in the chat ongoing as the presentations are flowing throughout the program. And even though we will have the question and answer part of the program a bit later, we will also try to answer in the chat as we go. I will be introducing the speakers throughout the program as we go, so you don't have to get all the introductions straight away. And the first introduction is my colleague Lina Andreasen. She's going to give us an overview of civil preparedness, how it's organized across Nordic countries. She's a research fellow here at Nordregio, a political scientist focusing on governance and cross-border cooperation. And she's going to walk us through the similarities and differences and how responsibilities are divided in the Nordics. Welcome, Lina.
Thank you very much, Anne-Katrine. So I'll get straight to it. Who does what in a crisis? This presentation draws on a policy background report I've written for the Nordregio project on civil preparedness at regional and local levels. We cover 8 countries: Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and the autonomous territories, Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Åland. Rather than walking through each country one by one, I'll take a thematic approach and bring in specific countries as cases when they show something particularly interesting. First, a bit of context. Both NATO and the EU sets a shared baseline for preparedness, and all 5 Nordic countries are now NATO members, including Finland and Sweden, who joined in 23 and 24. The EU's 2025 Preparedness Union strategy calls for a shift from managing crisis to building proactive resilience beforehand. The common thing across both frameworks is the whole of society approach. Governments alone cannot do this. Private companies, civil society, and individuals must all be part of the system. But the interesting story is how differently the Nordic countries have built their architecture to meet this shared goal. Rather than just listing definitions one by one, I want to show that there is a conceptual spectrum here. At one end, Sweden and Norway have the clearest total defense framing. Civil preparedness is explicitly the civilian side of military-civilian system designed for a potential war scenario. Denmark is currently making a strategic shift toward this end of the spectrum. In February this year, the Danish government announced a new total defense strategy, explicitly moving towards the total defense framing that Sweden and Norway have long used. Finland takes a different angle here. Their comprehensive security model treats a pandemic or supply chain crisis with the same institutional seriousness as armed conflicts. It's not just about war, it's about keeping society functioning in any crisis. I'll try and give a brief national oversight here. All 8 Nordic countries have a lead national authority, but what they do varies a lot. Looking at the table, 3 things stand out. First, Sweden's scale. They have 60 designated preparedness authorities organized into 10 sectors. That's a highly systematized architecture. Second, Iceland is the outlier in that the real operational rescue capacity doesn't sit in a state agency. ISAR, a volunteer search and rescue organization, is effectively the backbone of emergency response. And third, Finland's NESA. Most countries' national agencies are about coordinating and planning. NESA is different. It operates like a strategic economic regulator, maintaining physical stockpiles of fuel, medicines, and food. And it can legally require companies in certain sectors to maintain their own stockpiles. And moving on to the regional roles. The regional tier is where the national plans meet the local reality. Most Nordic countries use this tier primarily for coordinating and auditing. County governors in Norway, regional administrative agencies in Finland, and administrative boards in Sweden. What's worth highlighting from a structural standpoint is that Sweden's civilområden system, they have organized 21 county boards into 6 civil areas that correspond explicitly to military command regions. This is designed so that civil and military crisis management can talk to each other in a war case scenario. Sweden is the only Nordic country that has structurally formalized this civil-military alignment at the regional level. The other striking case is Iceland, which I mentioned as a contrast. They have no regional layer, just national and local. And then they have 9 policy commissioner districts doing the regional coordination work. Moving on to the municipal roles. Municipalities are the front line of civil preparedness. Across all 8 Nordic countries, there is a legally mandated baseline. Municipalities must have a preparedness plan, maintain essential services, and be able to respond to local crises. The challenge is that municipal capacity varies a lot. Not every municipality has the resources or expertise to do this well. The Denmark case is a nice solution worth highlighting. Rather than requiring each of their 98 municipalities to run their own fully equipped fire brigades, Denmark allows for inter-municipal cooperation. You cooperate with your neighbors, pool equipment, and share training. This is a simple but good example of how administrative design can bridge the capacity gap. And the same logic applies in the Faroe Islands, where 19 grouped preparedness areas serve a very similar purpose. And to the private sector. Private businesses own and operate most of the critical infrastructure in Nordic societies. Energy grids, telecom networks, transport, food supplies. So civil preparedness cannot work without engaging them. But the degree of obligation varies significantly. Iceland has legal obligations on paper, but in a country of around 400,000 people, the practical relationship is relatively informal. Denmark uses a mix of incentives and legal duties. Some sectors are legally required to maintain continuity. And our security acts and industrial safety regulations makes this more systematic. Companies in critical sectors must plan, conduct exercises, and follow authority directions during crisis. But Finland goes the furthest. NESA enforces stockpiling obligations. If you're an oil importer or a pharmaceutical supplier in Finland, you don't choose whether to maintain reserves. You're legally required to, and NESA monitors compliance. On the civil society, they're the glue between the state and the individual citizen in all Nordic preparedness systems. But 2 cases stand out. Iceland is extraordinary. ISAR and the Icelandic Red Cross are the operational core. If you need a search and rescue operation in Iceland, it's volunteers who show up. They even hold a seat at the National Policy Council. Finland's numbers are also striking. 60% of rescue operations are handled by volunteer fire brigades. That's not a gap in public capacity, it's a deliberate design chosen to integrate community engagement into the state system. And then Norway has this lovely, softer concept of preparedness bodies, where the official DSB guidance encourages you to identify which neighbor you'll look after in a crisis. That is psychological resilience built into official policy. On the individual role, how long should you manage alone? One of the clearest ways to see how national security thinking translates into citizen-facing policy is to look at the household preparedness standards. The baseline across Denmark, Finland, Faroe Islands, and Åland is 72 hours, 3 days. But Norway and Sweden have both recently raised theirs to 1 week. That is a significant signal. Both countries have taken stock of the geopolitical situation and decided that 3 days is no longer enough. Greenland has gone to 5 days because in Arctic settlements where infrastructure fails, external help can take longer. The Greenland case is the most vivid illustration of how preparedness must reflect actual local conditions. Their official 2026 guidelines list hunting weapons, ammunition, and fishing gear as standard household emergency supplies. That's a response to the reality that for many communities, being able to hunt is more reliable than waiting on a container ship. Iceland here is the outlier. They don't issue a standard brochure. Because their main threats are volcanoes, earthquakes, and glacial floods, they provide real-time, threat-specific guidance on their civil protection website. The challenges I found most consistent across the Nordic analysis are these 4. On coordination, the problem isn't usually that plans don't exist, it's that plans at different levels don't always fit together. And when a real crisis hit, the friction between levels become visible. On supply chains, the COVID-19 was a stress test that most systems did not fully pass. Dependencies are deep and mostly invisible until they break. On municipality capacity, legislation creates a floor of obligations, but the distance between that floor and what municipalities do varies. And on the private sector integration, most countries have moved from purely voluntary to some legal requirements, but the governance architecture for engaging businesses remains underdeveloped, here being the NSA in Finland an exception. And now to the constructive turn. What does the analysis tell us about what works? The 4 patterns I've identified are all transferable in some form. Civil society integration is perhaps the most important. The Nordic regions has extraordinary volunteer traditions, but the question is whether those volunteers are formally embedded in governance structures or just informally relied upon. Resource pooling is a directly actionable lesson for any country with small municipalities facing capacity constraints. And psychological resilience is an underrated component that deserves more policy attention. The evidence from Norway and Finland suggests that community solidarity has material impacts on crisis outcomes. And then the cross-border Nordic learning. This project is itself an example of that. We're comparing architectures precisely because there is something to be gained from looking at how your neighbors have solved the same kind of problem that you are facing. One of the risks in comparative work is listing differences without explaining them. So I want to be clear about what drives these variations we see. Geopolitical context is the most obvious. Sweden and Norway's total defense models reflect a specific reading of their security situation, one that has become sharper since 2022. Finland's comprehensive security model is shaped by over 1.3 kilometers of 1,300 kilometers of border with Russia, and the long history of navigating that reality. Since 2022, the whole Nordic region has moved somewhat toward Sweden and Finland's direction. Geography is perhaps the most underestimated driver. The Iceland and Arctic territories simply face a different physical reality. A 3-day standard makes sense in Copenhagen. It doesn't make sense in Greenland. And third, the administrative tradition. Whether you believe municipality or the state should own a problem, whether you centralize or decentralize, shapes the whole architecture. Some key takeaways from today. I want to offer 4 things worth taking away from the analysis. The first one being the diversity within the Nordic region is real and meaningful. These are not just surface differences. Second, preparedness standards are a mirror of security thinking. When a country raises the household self-sufficiency standards from 3 to 7 days, it's a political statement about the threat environment. And third, the countries with the most robust civil society integration, Iceland especially, show that volunteers are governance assets that need to be treated as such. And finally, the implementation gap at the local level is the common vulnerability across the Nordic region. Strong national frameworks are necessary, but not sufficient. The question for the coming years is how we close this gap between what the law requires and what municipalities do. And the best answers seem to involve resource pooling, regional support, and civil society engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Line, for that great presentation. Now we're going to move from preparedness overview to preparedness in practice. And we have speakers here today from Sweden, Iceland, and Denmark, and I've been keeping an eye on the chat. I can see that we have great representation from all the Nordic countries here today, which is really good for our questions, hopefully later. Now we've heard about different country approaches, differences, similarities, crises we've been through together, and crises that are different depending on how our countries look. So now we're going to zoom in and look at the different levels of society. We're going to hear from experts at preparedness on the ground. And what do I mean by that? It's both responding to a crisis in real time and planning based on own experiences with crisis. And also, these are speakers who deal with challenges ranging from geographical, governmental, and community. We're very happy to have the three of you here. We're going to start with Carina Samli. It's my pleasure to introduce the mayor of Luleå, a municipality in northern Sweden. Carina has extensive experience in regional politics and public administration, and she works closely with the realities of preparedness, specifically with overlapping responsibilities, new demands linked to NATO integration and cross-border perspectives. Thank you very much, Carina. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and talk about what we do as a municipality. And as you heard in the presentation earlier, we do have different responsibilities within the Arctic and the Nordic countries. I come from the city of Luleå, far up in the north of Sweden. We're in the Arctic. That puts a special situation for us, of course. I will see if, well, good. Sweden has a system of total defense, the total defense concept that Line was telling us about. We work with that in different parts. The first of it is the civil defense and the civil preparedness. That's divided up in crisis management, and that we've had as a responsibility for a long time in Sweden. And what's been growing for the past 5 years or 4 years is, of course, the civil defense. And that is the planning for wartime conditions and also making sure that we have the capacities we need in wartime situations. The military actors, they are responsible for the military defense. And when we say the total defense, we mean the military defense and the civil defense. We also have a system where everyone is responsible for the same things in peacetime as in wartime, which means that as a municipality in Sweden, we're responsible of fire department, we're responsible of local roads, but also school, elderly care, preschools, swimming arenas, libraries, and everything like that. And that means that in a crisis, but also in wartime, we're responsible for the same things. And that means that every part of Sweden is a part of the total defense, because you are supposed to go to your job and continue doing what you should be doing if your services are not needed somewhere else, as some of us, of course, will be doing other things if a crisis or a war situation comes to us. In Luleå, we work with a continuity management as our way to make sure that we are doing the right thing. We are right now doing our analysis of what are our critical functions which resources do we have. How will the municipality in Luleå be continuing with our services in a war situation? And that is what we are planning for right now. As the municipality in Sweden, as I said, we are responsible for the same things in a wartime as in a peacetime or in a normal crisis. So we are responsible for everything that we usually do, but in a wartime, we are also responsible for the local area responsibility, make sure that everyone within our the local area of Luleå is also safe. So that is something new we need to plan for that we do not do in peace times. As I said, we used the process of continuity management, and we are planning to make sure that we can continue what we are doing. And right now we are doing our risk and impact analysis to make sure that we can continue what we're doing. And to do this, we are starting exercising, of course. And 5 years ago, we were supposed to, as a municipality, to plan for a crisis, and we would do a risk analysis. Is this a big risk of this crisis? And right now we need to do the planning for wartime. So that means that we need to do all our analysis in a new way the past years. And we've been doing that, and right now learning, exercising to make sure that we have everything we need. And I can hint and say that we do not have everything in place right now, but we are working in a very fast pace. And we are also working together with the Swedish government to make sure that we can finance the costs coming into this preparedness work. As I also said, that we cooperate very closely with everyone else. The county administrative board, they are responsible. They also are responsible over the civil areas that Lina mentioned earlier. And make sure we need to cooperate with them as a part of the region of Norrbotten, of course. We also need to work with local companies, people living here, civil societies, organizations, and of course the military. I want to talk a little bit more about food, because that is something we need to. We've been working a lot with the past years, and that is because we in Sweden we have a lot of food in our services, in schools, in preschools, and also in elderly care, and that is what we as a municipality is responsible of in a crisis, as always. And what we see is that this is very, very central to be able to continue with our schools or continue with our elderly care. And this is critical for the trust of the municipality. And we also see that we need to build local capacity because we can't rely on the national capacity in a national or global crisis. And what we also see is that being in the Nordic and up in the Arctic, we have long distances and we are very, very vulnerable for logistic problems right now, which means that we need to build local capacity of food production in peacetime so that we have it in wartime. And I must also say that we have one lovely person working with the food sector, but this is not a job for her. This is a job for all our services in the municipality. Everyone need to make sure that we have food and also water. I must say that's also one of our responsibilities if a crisis comes. And we try to make sure that we have everything in the right place now, because you can't build up a new system in a wartime or a crisis situation. We need to make sure that there are local food suppliers in Luleå, in our near area, now in peacetime, so that we have them when we need them. And right now, we make sure that everyone is working with this in their services. We use different measures to make sure that we can adapt to different situations. Rotated near storages in our preschools. We have shelf storage. We are buying in freeze dryers to make sure that we can store freeze-dried food. But we also make agreements with suppliers, especially local food producers, to make sure that they can give us the food we need continually in a situation. As a municipality in Sweden, we should be able to continue with what we're doing for 3 months is the requirements right now. And after that, we will be ready to go into a new situation. And as you understand, no one will start producing potatoes within 3 months. So we need to plan that we have that before the crisis comes. And that we do through procurements and make sure that the local producers can have an affair to be able to make the production in peacetime. And as I said, we want everyone to be able to have food in the situation, but we are responsible firstly for the schools and the elderly care and some other critical services that we have in the municipality. We are also a part of NATO, and we've been that for a few years now. And we see that very, very clearly. First of all, we see the NATO membership is a national membership. And we, within the NATO, we have the host nation support system. And as I said, the ones who are responsible for something in peacetime is also responsible in wartime. And that means that the responsibilities that are on the municipalities today, they are also a part of the NATO entrance, and that we need to adapt to that as a municipality. We right now, we have the Sweden's northernmost Air Force base, F21 here in Luleå. So we are used to cooperating with the forced arms and the military defense, and we work very, very closely with them. And the past years, we've been doing a lot of exercise together with them to try to understand what they need and how they are growing. And what we see right now, it's in an increase of military presence here. We see big exercises from Swedish troops and forces, but also from other NATO countries coming in here. And we also see troop movements, of course. And I must also say that NATO is not only military cooperation, it's a defense cooperation. And in the Swedish terminology, it's also then the total defense cooperation, which means that we cooperate with NATO for supply of energy, water, and all other parts as well. And we also have those exercises coming into the city, even if what we see the closest and the most fastest coming right now is, of course, the military and armed forces moving and exercising in the north. So that affects us more than we can think. And it definitely affects like the roads where we need to rebuild the roundabouts so that the armed forces can pass here through the municipality, and many other things as well. And I must also say that Luleå is a part of the Arctic Mayors Forum. That's a cooperation between mayors or municipalities in the Arctic. We have members from 7 countries right now. And right now we are handling a project that's called the Enhanced Northern Connectivity. And that is for us to cooperate between communities on local level on preparedness around the Arctic. We have some situation where we can learn a lot within Sweden, our colleagues. We appreciate Nordregio's studies of the Nordic situation, but we also have a lot to learn from Greenland, from Alaska, from Canada, and we need to cooperate with them. So right now we are trying to make sure that our local experts working on local level in different parts of the Arctic can meet and cooperate about and share their knowledge, and to make sure that we can do more and learn from each other. And if you're interested in this project, we of course have a website, so you're welcome to come there and learn more about the project. And with that, I would say thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Carina, for that presentation and all those very interesting facts, and also for the shout out to the Arctic Mayors Forum as well, where Nordregio also participates. Thank you very much. And we are ahead of time, so that leaves more time for questions later. But for now, we are going to move from the municipal level to a broader level, the Eastern Icelandic regional perspective. Uro Gunnarsdottir joins us from Austabru. She works at the intersection of communication, crisis management, and regional development. And she has a background in diplomacy and crisis communication. Uro will show how regional actors strengthen coordination and public communication, drawing on experiences from recent landslide events and ongoing work on community resilience. Welcome, Uro.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry. I think.
Is it working?
Yep.
With the, yeah.
I think, yep. So I'll come back to this gentleman here on the picture, but he's from ISA that Line told you a bit about the volunteer services. And I'm going to try to touch upon this on a regional level, but also tell you a little bit about our research that we have been doing into crisis work and the effects. So maybe just first a few thoughts. There's a lot of talk about war whenever we are in a Nordic context, talking about crisis, but we are mainly geared up for natural hazard. So the discussion about war is still not quite with us, but still I think that this is slowly changing. I mean, we are starting to get aware that there are also man-made changes and dangers that might affect us, and this would be this would trigger the same response system, but the question remains whether whether reaction will be the same. This is just starting. The Red Cross is the first. They have started a campaign for 3 days preparations, that you have supplies for 3 days. It may be relevant in the capital, in Reykjavik, but where I live in the east of Iceland, most people, when they hear this, say 3 days. I have 30 days of supplies in my freezer, but it remains to be seen how the reaction will actually be when if this becomes truly relevant. As Lina went through, the civil preparedness system is both of course countrywide. It's the civil protection and emergency management, that's the police. It's on a regional level, that's the police running, and the municipalities are the main actors there. But others have a very prominent role. It's the ISA. It's the Red Cross, but it can also be all kinds of public and private companies or organizations, depending on what happens. This could be the fire brigade, this could be electricity, heating, water supplies. I mean, it could be anything that we may need in a certain situation. So they are then drawn in. They're drawn to the table. This is the photo is from an ISAR operation. So basically, to show you this on a different level, the municipalities, the ISAR, the Red Cross, and the fire department, they sit at the table with the police in the civil response, but others can be drawn to the table, but they depending on what the crisis is. Private companies, to a lesser extent, but they have been. I mean, it can be anything from a crisis calling for heavy-duty equipment that is owned by a company or an individual, and then that may be drawn in, or the crisis affecting a large company to a particular extent, and then that company is drawn into the situation, such as avalanches, for instance. East Iceland has tested. I mean, in East Iceland, the system is tested to the extreme. I think just in the last 5 years, we have had COVID, of course, like everybody else. We had massive mudslides in a fjord with a number of houses destroyed. We had an avalanche in another fjord in east, which damaged houses and cars. We have a number of yellow and orange weather warnings. I pulled together. This is a rough number of warnings per year, and this is the weather warnings generally mainly trigger police and ISAR response, but they may draw others in, such as the Red Cross. In the east, all municipalities in East Iceland are they have decided to organize themselves on a regional level together. So this is one system, and the system because the system is constantly being tested, people are also getting to know each other, they are getting to trust each other, and they have used the system, the response system, to other events that affect the population. It can be, for instance, these have been in the last few years, murders, accidents that have triggered a response from this system. Because they coordinate regularly, and they have increased these regular coordination meetings. They have established trust, as I said. That's super important, because it's both you trust the people, you know them, you have their number in their phone, you call them whenever there is a crisis or there's the possibility of a crisis coming up. They call each other. They are doing increasing number of tabletop exercises to check the system and to improve it. And one of the, I think the best thing coming out of this is a trauma team that has been activated for events, small and large. For instance, a danger of a suicide in small societies can trigger a wave of suicides amongst, for instance, young people. So this trauma team is activated whenever there is a large event, but also when there are isolated events that may affect the population. There is an increased awareness of the mental or the most emotional aspect of crisis, and there is also more and more coordination with infrastructure and private actors, and this is all born out of necessity. If I just touch briefly on our role, where I work at the Association of Municipalities in the East, we do, for instance, we've done a number of research relating to this and coordinating. This is a vast area, 10% of Iceland's landmass, but only 3% of the population. We have been after the mudslides in Seyðisfjörður, we did a project in supporting both inhabitants but also businesses in the aftermath of the crisis, because this affected businesses proportionally very heavily. We've also done a number of research to try to identify the gaps and improve our response. And one of them was a research that we did on resilience of societies in the aftermath of crisis. And this we ran 5 years ago, and we are trying to get funds to repeat this, to see, to try to measure resilience when not in the immediate aftermath, but also within 5-6 years, to see where we are at. And we are also participating in an EU project which focuses to manage risks and focus on information, because when this whole testing period that I referred to, this five-year testing period started, one of the main things that came out of the mudslide hitting Seyðisfjörður was that information was lacking, that we needed to improve on that, which I believe we have managed, but we are also working on an EU level to try to find solutions for that. Maybe if I just tell you a bit about the local resilience project, what came out of that, but that in the immediate aftermath of of such a traumatic event, there was great cohesion. I mean, people were kind of, I mean, they were of course heavily affected, but they kept together, and there was this mix of optimism. You know, there was a fighting spirit. We're not giving up, but also many people had great fear of severe weather that they believed could actually trigger a new wave of avalanches or mudslides, and concerns about future disasters. And there was also quite a lot of anger because of the information flow was lacking. It was very insufficient, and it affected particularly foreigners, people that do not speak or understand Icelandic, and that was very problematic in this event. But the system is also very much aware of this need, that this needs to be improved. We do believe that there is a need for repeated research. From what we can see, there are strong indications that there is a lack of, how can I put it, lack of perseverance in the long term by those that were hit the hardest. For instance, individuals that had a small company that they lost and they had to build up from scratch. They were fighting for years to try to set it up with some help from the government, but in the long run, after 3 years, we have seen a few companies and a few individuals give up selling the companies and move away. And we need to adjust. I think what we've learned from this is that we need to adjust the response mechanism to this. I mean, we need to look at more longer term, the longer term effects of crisis, because of course we would like to see that within a year or 2 years, max 3 years, that things are fine, that people can move on, but that is not the case. It has a longer term effect, which we need to be patient and be ready to deal with that. The EU project that I mentioned before, that we are a part of, we used Seyðisfjörður, where the mudslides hit, as a test case. We're doing this together with the Met Office in Iceland and Civil Protection, the police, and Ösebro, where I work. And two things we have developed coming out of this is information materials for inhabitants and visitors. So basically information on the area, on the dangers, and on the response, basically helping people understand the area you're in. And this is particularly aimed at new residents, those that move to Seyðisfjörður, and particularly foreigners, so that they understand where they are and how the response is built up. We have also this we will do mainly through a website with the materials. The website will be connected to the Met Office website and the Civil Protection website, so it's relatively light. So you can even if the communication is difficult in crisis, you should be able to get on it, and it will then for any further information, it will then lead you to the Met Office website and the police website. But it will give you all the new information and all basic information that you need. But we've also developed a climate story, which is aimed at younger audiences, and the picture that we have there is from that climate story to try to explain to our new residents what the system entails. What have we learned? I think it's extremely important that we cooperate, both EU-wide or Europe-wide and Nordic, because we're all dealing with the same challenges. But for us, the most important, of course, is regular cooperation locally. We're quite isolated as a part of Iceland. I think we're probably one of the most isolated. We're the furthest away from the capital area. And when we discuss with the police, ISAR, and others that are in this remote are in the response, they say that the idea of being isolated for days is basically it is ingrained in the system, and it's ingrained in people's mind because we can get isolated due to bad weather, for instance. Information is key. If it's lacking, it creates great confusion, and it creates anger and resentment, and it's difficult to accept for people, and this is what and it's difficult to deal with afterwards, and it erodes the trust in the system. So it's incredibly important that that information is working, because trust is an essential part of this system working. And the emotional part is a key factor. We're constantly trying to find the right way to communicate about crisis through, I mean, it's basically a mix of rationality and emotion. And this, of course, when in warnings, to keep people aware but not afraid. I believe I've reached the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ordur. Really poignant examples here, and fascinating also to see a concrete example and an ongoing case study of how to improve communications and also acknowledge the emotional fallout of these kind of crises. Thank you very much for your perspectives. I certainly have follow-up questions, but please keep the questions coming in the chat so that we have time for that afterwards. And with that, our final perspective brings us to the civil society and emergency services. Per Højris Vedsted is head of emergency response in North Jylland, Denmark. He has a long-standing background in risk management and interdisciplinary collaboration, and he's going to focus on preparedness as a shared responsibility, highlighting how partnerships with communities and local businesses are built in practice and what it takes to sustain engagement in more remote areas. Welcome, Per.
Thank you.
And bear with us while we get the slides working.
Maybe it comes. Yeah, that is.
It's working? Great.
Yes, it's working. Good. I would like to provide an overview of how North Jutland's emergency management works to make the population emergency prepared and to encourage shared responsibility for improving safety from an emergency preparedness perspective. In addition, I will address how we incorporate new forms of partnerships into our work with volunteers. Volunteers are not just volunteers in a traditional sense. In our view, we work with three categories of volunteers. Finally, I will describe how we can collaborate with local businesses, both private and public, on recruiting part-time firefighters while simultaneously strengthening the ties between civil society, employers, and the emergency services. There is a common perception that when an incident occurs, you call 112 and help arrives. But is that always the case? We are accustomed in everyday life to having stable access to basic necessities such as electricity, water, heating, communication, and food. This is also make us vulnerable, regardless of which crisis occurs and what consequences it entails. In order for us to and other authorities to focus on efforts where they create the greatest value, it is important that citizens and businesses are emergency prepared and ready. This is something we work with in North Jutland. One example is our collaboration with local businesses and municipalities to strengthen cooperation between the private sector and the public authorities when crises arise. The objective is to pool knowledge and resources so that the consequences of, for example, power outage, accidents, or other crises can be limited for both businesses and local communities. Emergency preparedness is organized into 6 networks covering, among other areas: 1. Emergency and water supply; 2. Food supply and retail; 3. Logistics and transport; and 4. Telecommunications; and 5. Accommodations; and 6. Constructions and trades. Companies are currently mapping their resources in a shared catalog. This includes registration equipment and personnel that can be made available to authorize within 6 hours during a crisis situation. The catalog is intended for use by both North Jutland's emergency management and the municipal crisis staff. Another example is our cooperation with the SMW North Jutland, which represents small and medium-sized enterprises. Companies with a limited number of employees and relatively low turnover compared to large enterprises. Our primary contribution here is helping companies develop an emergency preparedness plan based on the following 4 headings. Prepared by identifying relevant threats and ensuring management mandate for planning, conduct impact and risk analysis and define preventive and continuity plan, implement the identified prevention and the continuity plan, and maintain the continuity plan on an ongoing basis and regular expertise to the specific continuity plan. We also develop materials for businesses and housing associates on fire safety, enabling them to prevent potential fire situation or circumstances that could be complicated firefighting or rescue efforts. And now I will say something a little bit similarly to what Line before talked about. There is some thing we will look at the same way. Volunteers form a central component of a modern, resilient emergency preparedness system. They contribute local knowledge, flexibility, and additional manpower that can make a decisive difference both in prevention and during acute incidents. Collaboration with civil society actors, volunteer emergency groups, associations, local networks and organizations create broader capacity and makes emergency preparedness more present in the local communities. When volunteers are engaged strategy and professional, they strengthen both operational response and social resilience, areas that the public emergency services cannot manage alone. To fully realize the potential of volunteers, clear frameworks, defined roles, and strong incentives are required. Citizens and volunteers contribute prevention, local insight, and rapid mobilization, while municipalities create structures that make participation simple and meaningful. Emergency management is responsible for training, coordination, and supporting volunteers so that they work safely, efficiently, and in close cooperation with professional resources. Incentives must be clear, meaningful task, relevant training, good conditions for engagement, and the experience of making a difference in the local community. Yes. To fully realize the potential of volunteers, clear frameworks, defined roles, and strong intentions are required. Emergency management is responsible for training, coordination, and supporting volunteers so that they work safely, efficiently, and in close cooperation with professional resources. North Jutland's emergency management currently has 140 volunteers since 2023. The plan has been to locate the volunteers unit of 4 sites geographically distributed so that they can reach the entire operational area within an acceptable response time, ideally within 2 hours. It has also been important that these sites provide a solid recruitment base for new volunteers and that suitable garage and facilities are available. The main tasks carried out include first aid, climate-related tasks, catering, accommodations and logistics, capacity building and response. However, it has proven difficult to recruit a sufficient number of new volunteers. Another challenge is the lack of local engagement. Our experience shows that volunteers are eager to sign up for specific tasks, but the requirement to remain and stand by and regularly train and exercise to maintain competencies makes volunteering with North Jutland emergency management less attractive today. As a result, we are exploring new ways of collaboration with volunteers. We are working on introduction an element involving a group of people who received minimal equipment and minimal training to serve as volunteers, and we call it spontaneous volunteers. The idea is that we can activate them locally when an incident occurs and in their area. We are still in the development phase and therefore do not yet have empirical evidence regarding quality or substantiability. However, we expect that this initiative will help us recruit additional volunteers. Although it will be required adjustments and changes in our way of thinking and working. North Jutland's emergency management employs 650 part-time firefighters, staffing 35 fire stations across North Jutland. In many respects, a part-time firefighter can be compared to a volunteer. In Denmark, 32% of all firefighters respond to incidents on a volunteer or part-time basis. Denmark has approximately 9,600 firefighters, of whom 7,900 are on-call firefighters. Recruiting part-time firefighters has become increasingly difficult for several reasons. Therefore, we conducted an analysis of part-time firefighters, reasons for affiliations, as well as their demographics. We received response from 395 part-time firefighters. In addition to a narrow recruitment pool, there are 6 factors that play a role. Major changes in the labor market, difficult to combine with primary employment, increased demands of the role, time commitment versus compensation perceived as imbalanced, changing generations and values, and last, increased physical and psychological strain. Overall assessment of that is this is not about lacking willingness, but rather structural and social changes, work patterns, and conditions that no longer align with the traditional part-time emergency response model. Sorry. For this reason, Northjylland's emergency management collaborates closely with companies to recruit part-time firefighters. We have development materials that describe what it is like to be a manager of a part-time firefighter, what it is like to be a part-time firefighter, and common misconceptions about being a part-time firefighter. And the last one pager with information about contacts, details, and so on. We provide local support through campaign days, and experience shows that each campaign day typically results in 3 to 4 new part-time firefighters. And that ends my speaking, and I say thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for your presentation and for the great examples as well. And very interesting also to hear about your own analysis here of the volunteers and what motivates them and what, you know, restricts them as well. That was some interesting points. We have some incoming questions in the chat. Please keep them coming. And I will also invite Lina back to the platform to help answer questions here. And I want to start, there was a question here about some financial challenges and how do countries compare in terms of preparedness investment per capita. But I actually want to give that over to our external speakers here, because as you know, you all know, when there is a crisis, investment floods in, right, to cover the gap and to kind of up the whole risk kind of preparedness level. But what are the challenges in keeping this, keeping the financials in terms of keeping up with ongoing risk and also rising risk? And I want to start by giving that to you, Karina. What are the financial challenges in preparedness investment? Sorry.
The financial challenges is there are many. First of all, Sweden has not been preparing enough, or we prepared for a crisis and the risk of crisis a few years ago, and now we're switching over to preparing for a war situation. We hope we're not going to war, but that is what we plan for, which means that everything is like growing very, very fast. Sweden has a system where we have, as you mentioned earlier, 10 sector authorities or sectors on the national level, and they have been preparing on and had money from the government for that. And right now we're on the local level and regional level, like what do we need to do locally? And we still do not really see the money coming from the national level. So we have to do it within our own budgets. And well, we still have schools and we still have buses and everything has to work out as usual. And I do not want to raise the tax for people living here. So we are like applying for money from the national level to be able to cope with what we're doing. And of course, trying to figure out what's most important to do first and use our own money for that. And yes, we do see some financial support, but not enough, I would say.
Thank you very much, Karina. Udo, I also want to ask you, because you were talking about this very interesting, you know, kind of research project and the climate story information that comes out of this. And it seems, you know, usually in a crisis, there are research projects where funding comes along. But can you tell us a little bit about the crisis of depopulation? You talked about how it's difficult for families, foreigners that have moved to places with the emotional fallout to want to stay and to want to keep investing, particularly in remote areas. What are some of the financial challenges there of avoiding that?
I think maybe if I can maybe just echo what Karina said about finances first. I think generally the challenge is to finance the system also when there's not a crisis, so that it's well financed. Here in in Iceland, the police is not the crisis response system is not well financed. It's super light, and it's based on the trust that the finance will come if the crisis hits, and this is a wrong way around doing things. So that you have to kind of put in the money if you're a municipality or if you're police and hope that the money is going to come because everybody feels kind of that this was too much to handle. So that really is is a challenge. I think a challenge for I don't know whether it's so much a challenge in terms of finances. I think it's more for the residents. I think it's more finding the right way to communicate to them, because it is difficult. It's difficult to communicate about crisis when there's not a crisis, because you don't want to scare people. You want them to be aware. You want them to be prepared and not scared. And it's I think that's the challenge for us, to find out how do we create this system that how do we make people want to be prepared? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do I so that I'm not just scrambling to try to remember what was that website again? Where again do I find this information once it happens? I mean, because we're aware of this, but we are building the system up so that people will find this website relatively quickly, that they will find the information quickly. But it is much better if we find a way to communicate this. And I think we have to go further down in the schools. But then the challenge is really how do we communicate? How do we make kids, young people aware of this without making them they're really scared? I don't think it's a problem with keeping residents. I don't think that they are moving en masse because of the fear of crisis. I think there are other things that are maybe more difficult than that.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point as well, that it takes more than money when it comes to residents as well, and the feeling of safety. It's not really something that you can grasp that simply. But one thing is residents. Another thing is, of course, if this is your full-time or part-time work. And Pia, you mentioned, yourself, this kind of the kind of different compensation, or the lack of compensation, as one of the demotivators for volunteers, which is of course understandable when you have to be on standby in a time where more and more crises are hitting. So what can you tell us about the financial challenges there in terms of recruiting volunteers?
Yeah, it's a huge problem, I think, because that's the way we do it in Denmark. And if we not honorate part-time firefighters in another way, we don't have this system in approximately 10 years. But it's 10 times the price if you have to have full-time firefighters on all stations. So it's a lot of economy, but I don't think it's going to go that way. So we have to think about something else, something between part-time and full-time firefighters. But I don't have the answers. But I think we have very it's in the near future we have to do something in another way, or we don't have any hands to help with the.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's with the numbers you were saying, it makes total sense why having that many full-time firefighters would maybe not be feasible. Can you tell us a little bit, now that I have you, Per, can you talk a little bit about how the public view of the volunteer, of the preparedness volunteer, has changed within maybe just the last 5 years?
Yeah, it's not like we see in other countries. They're not in Denmark. There's not the hero thinking about it, but I think some of the reasons people get part-time firefighters is they want to do a different. They want to help society. They want to do something else. But we can also see it's the type of people we can recruit is the same. We have to look wider and have to respond in municipalities and in private sectors we not have done before. We have to rethink the way we are thinking on, if you can say that.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. It's changing times for sure, and also with new generations also comes a learning gap. Each time. Urdu, I wanna move back to you and ask a little bit about. We're all here today, and Nordregio is part of this Nordic comparison. We like to say that we collaborate a lot. We share this culture of trust in the Nordics. But when it comes to differences in geography, in physical makeup of countries, a big outstanding here is Iceland. In terms of not just crisis, but ongoing crisis and crisis on top of crisis. So Urdu, when Iceland is looking at collaborating or learning, from other Nordic countries, can you tell us a little bit about that and which forums you look to?
It's a good question. We've been working on a small research for the working group that you spoke about. I think Ellen mentioned at the outset. And when we have been asking, we've been speaking to the police, to ISA, to Red Cross, to the municipalities, to many actors. And when you talk about communication, learning from others, it is it's quite an abstract. It takes quite an abstract thinking because we don't share borders to anyone. So I think it is in terms of cooperation, it's more about learning how you can build up the system, and I think we have learned quite a lot. I know that ISTAR has been very active in international cooperation in terms of being part of a response system, but also learning and sharing methods of rescue. But it is I think much more abstract for us than for other Nordic countries because of the distance, and we have very much more. Our thinking goes, what if we're isolated? That is something that we can quickly turn to because we know what it is to be isolated. It happens a few times a year due to bad weather and or due to avalanches or mudslides. So that's that. We are much more in that thinking than how do we cooperate. So it is quite abstract, and I think more focused on learning methods rather than engaging in cooperation. With one exception, though, that I think several actors mentioned, and that is accidents at sea. For instance, if there would be a cruise ship going down or a cruise ship in danger in the mid-Atlantic. Then we realize that we are absolutely totally dependent on our Nordic neighbors, and it's a terrifying prospect if something happens because of the size of our response mechanism and the Nordic response mechanism in general, because these are big ships, and but I think otherwise not really.
Yeah, but this was an interesting perspective on it a little bit back, the learning methods versus the collaboration, because this is also what these forums can do as well, while a lot of this is also emerging. And I certainly think a lot of people can learn from this communication initiative that you've had to do as well. So thank you for that. We have a question in the chat to Line and Karina. Could you say something about the progress of developing cross-border cooperation on crisis preparedness in general, but also specifically on food supplies with neighboring regions in Finland and Norway. For example, the Karlstad Declaration in 2024. Yeah, maybe we'll start with you, Karina, and then Lina, if you have, want to add.
I'm not totally up to date on the food supply cooperation across border, I must say, but we do have very close cooperation, both on the national levels, of course, with responsible authorities, and also the regional. We cooperate with municipalities in both Finland and Norway very, very closely, and learning from them and trying to understand how they work to learn. But it's more learning from each other than planning together, I would say. On the county administrative board, I know that they have meetings across border, both with Norway and Finland, to make sure that we co-plan. And especially, I would say, within the NATO cooperation, we do see the Nordic, the Northern Nordics, the High North as one region, and you plan especially logistic floods through this area as it was one area, and the logistics for both, of course, the military defense, but also for food, electricity, fuel, energy, well, everything you need to make sure that the society works. So maybe Lina can continue.
Yeah, I can contribute that. We haven't looked into this region just yet, but we are planning a field trip to the region in this spring, where we will talk to some of these different initiatives, corporations across the borders, and get a better idea of how it's working in practice. So thank you for the question, and we'll get back to you on how that works more in details with the food supplies and different aspects.
Thank you very much. There's also a question here on farm preparedness and any integration of farms into preparedness strategies. Is that something you want to add to, Karina?
Yeah, I can do that, because that has been one of our works the past years, actually, because we see that we do not have enough farmers. And then we need to make sure that we, right now, in a normal situation, make sure that they have everything they need. Because in northern Sweden, farmers have actually been closing down the past years. We basically have no milk production left here. We used to think that we had a lot of potatoes growing in this area. We do not have that anymore. They are actually closed down the past like 10, 15 years. So right now we need to rebuild the system, and that includes making sure that there are farmers here and that the farmers have fuel so they can run their machines and make sure they have the possibilities to have their animals or growing what they need. So we need to, as a municipality right now, try to make sure that we make procurement processes so they can have a good working, be a farmer and has a working company for that and making money, because that is how we build resilience in this area and make sure that they are there if something happens. So we need to plan much more. And I must say, as a municipality, like 5 years ago, we were like, no, we just buy food. We do not buy farmers, or we do not buy a working system of making sure that we have someone delivering food to us. We just buy cheap food. And right now we switched that and like, no, our responsibility is to make sure that they can be here in a crisis or a war situation. And that means that we have to, well, as I said, make sure that they can be up and running now, so we have them when something happens.
Yeah. So really looking long term there as well is necessary either way. Yeah. But thank you for that perspective as well. I think the final question I'll ask is for you, Pia, because when you talk about engaging people, civil society, at a very personal level, in their community, on a volunteer basis, being ready. I also want to ask you about long-term planning, and if you can tell us what has proven most effective in sustainable long-term recruitment of volunteers. You said you had 140 volunteers since 2023. What keeps them close to wanting to stay in the preparedness?
Yeah, it's really a bad situation, because we have over 300 a few years ago. So we see a lot of volunteers that don't want to be with us anymore. And I think we are setting up demands for training and meetings when they are part of us. And I don't think that's the way in the future. Not for all. Some like it. Some want the social thing that come with it. But as I said earlier, we have to think about doing something locally, away from where we are, and do it more by the when it happens. Then we can use them, and then they don't have to do anything between something is happening. And that is because I think in the future we will see more happenings where we as a department not can help everyone at the same time. We need some hands, and therefore we have to do something about it in the villages that are not so big, if you can say it like that. And we have to think. We have to say we want for people to have to could do everything, but that's not necessary. Maybe if they meeting in and do what they can, that would be great.
So really
So-
focusing the role.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have to think a little bit in a new ways. I think and we don't have the right way yet, but it will come.
Yeah, but I think you're pointing to a big challenge here of creating ownership, local ownership of preparedness. So it doesn't fall only to experts, only to people who continually work, but that there is an ownership over the fact that this crisis aren't going away, they're multiplying, and they're happening at the same time. So I want to thank you all very much for your perspectives. Time is running quickly. And also thank you to Line. And then I want to invite Elin back to the stage. Thank you very much to our great panelists here, or our speakers. Elin, can you have the easy task of summing up the main takeaways? This is of course difficult, but what are your main takeaways of the day?
Well, it's a lot of food for thought, so thank you for that to all the speakers. I will say some things that I'm thinking about at the moment is that the Nordic region's strength lies in this context-sensitive or place-based approach, in that sense that we are having this adaptive and very collaborative approach to service provision, and then also crisis response. And what we have learned from Per on this volunteers, it's a very fragile system, but at the same time, that's also that we're building that into the structures is also part of it, sort of. So I'm looking forward to study that in the years to come. So it means that we have learned from Line and Carina and Urdur as well, that it's not only one Nordic welfare model, but several models, so to say. And the variation, how these models functions in terms of network governance, if you use a fancy academic term, or collaborative models when it comes to governance, is also something that we continue to study and see how the public authorities and the taxpayers' monies can be best to use, so to say, when it comes to this civil preparedness. And I think the reason for why we should study it is that the differences that we have, this context-specific approach, can create uneven access to services and uneven access to civil preparedness and crisis response. So it's something that we have to have a minimum level. I think it's to continue discussing that in the years to come. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Elin. Just so you know, in the audience, we will send out the slides and the recording of this webinar so that you can take all the learnings with you and share them with colleagues who couldn't join today. And our thematic group is preparing and working on an extensive report, including all of what you heard from Line today. That will be coming out later this year. Please stay tuned on the thematic group work. There's a QR code here. You can go in and read more about the thematic groups, and we will keep you updated on upcoming events, reports, and learnings, especially on the resilience front, what we can learn from each other across the Nordics, and certainly also how we can take ownership within each of our roles. Yes. Thank you very much. Let us know what you think as well of this webinar, what you've learned, what you've taken away, and what you would like to hear about in the future. Thank you to our speakers again. Thank you to our audience, and see you next time.
Thank you.